pediatric considerations?
Transport systems.
Thank you. Trauma systems.
I have to tell you, that Trauma Systems Committee is busy. They are doing some heavy-duty work. They had a workshop on January 24th and 25th, I believe, in Dallas, where they continue to work on some recommendations for changes to Rule 157, to Texas Administrative Code, Chapter 157. They addressed some issues around performance improvement plans, PI tools, long list of recommendations with a few changes that they recommended relating to transfers and what they would consider the maximum length of time a patient should be in a hospital before a transfer, delays in movement to the OR, delayed diagnosis, missed injuries. They talked about some event report recommendations, made a few recommendations there, trauma registry validation, and where am I? Made some recommendations for changes there. They worked on some injury prevention, alcohol-related injuries, suggestions for changes to the rules, and identified some top E-codes like falls, motor vehicle crashes, and suggested some changes and additions to the rules there. They also made a recommendation that there be some changes to or additions to the rules related to regional trauma advisory councils. Wanda gave a very nice, concise report on the work of that group and talked about the importance of moving the rules away from the how to develop a RAC and make it much more applicable to the RACs as they exist today and what they should have in place to be functional and in terms of finance and performance improvement and all kinds of issues. They moved most of those rule recommendations forward to GETAC by vote of their committee. One of the things that they did was discuss the age criteria for pediatrics. They have decided, had consensus and voted to establish the age criteria for geriatrics at 65, but did not have a recommendation until today for the age criteria for pediatrics. And with a little help, they moved off the dime and said that we should consider a pediatric patient an adult on their 15th birthday. So they voted to move forward a recommendation to GETAC to establish age criteria for pediatrics as the 15th birthday.
So would you be able to clarify the context in which one might use these age criteria?
Well, I think at least from my perspective, one of the things that we've always needed to do was establish an age for pediatric patients so that we can do some statistical reporting on, you know, what are the top 5 injury E-codes for pediatric patients. We can't do that if we don't say pediatrics stops at the 15th birthday. Now, there was Jim asked me if this is just applicable to trauma. I don't know that I can answer that question. Is Jory, are you here? Is there somebody from the PEDS committee that has some information or can share with us what the intent of the committee was when you talked about your recommendations? Lori was at the meeting of the Trauma Systems Committee in January. I wasn't there.
Yeah, we actually suggested doing a pediatric definition of age then, but we're encouraged not to. But it was specifically for trauma. So we're not talking about all pediatric patients. We're talking about this being in trauma rule, referring to trauma patients.
Right, this is the trauma rules.
Why were you encouraged not to?
Because we were told that we really couldn't define it. That was a regional definition. So each region should be defining their age.
And that's always been the argument, but I don't think any of us ever intended to try to tell regions how to establish transfer patterns or you know, who should get liability for taking care of a child or an adult, but for statistical purposes and for a definition, We need to say what is a pediatric patient.
Well, and the same discussion was had about geriatrics, just so you guys know. They didn't want the definition for that either, because some people may say it's 65, somebody may say it's 70. Some people are saying 55 now, God forbid, but they
Yeah,
are.
that- no.
So that discussion came up too, is, you know, can we really define a geriatric patient by age? So,
Well, I think part of the relevance to definitions is it does create the rubric under which one would sort of approach the science of not just research, but education, clinical interventions. And so I think the fear is over-application of a definition in a clinical setting could end up with a misdirected patient that goes simply to a children's hospital when the child is really, for all practical purposes, developed enough to be an adult and best handled by an adult site. So it ends up being a quality issue. So I was challenged by how one would define that and whether we need to create some criteria for circumstances under which that definition would be used.
Yeah, I think that's a good idea. But, you know, in the context of trauma, one of the reasons the 15th birthday was even suggested is because that's what the American College of Surgeons considers a pediatric patient, is after the 15th birthday, they're adults. And field triage criteria, they should go to an adult facility and things like that. So that was the context of the 15th birthday,
Okay.
where it applies to trauma.
So then in response to that activity, does this committee then need to look at qualifying that definition and explaining the circumstances under which we think it's most reasonable? My big fear is we shouldn't be prescriptive about the definition, and it shouldn't evolve into either punitive activities because a patient is treated one way or the other because they're 15 years and 1 day.
I think your point previously about defining the definition of what that 15th birthday means is integral to what happens here.
Okay.
If it is just for statistical reasons, so that we can all say a pediatric patient, when we run reports from the registry or whatnot, that it's 15 years old, as opposed to for every protocol we write for pediatrics versus adults, it's that 15th birthday. I think we need to decide what, or recommend a definition for utilizing that.
Okay. Is that something that this group feels requires further evaluation, bring back to the subsequent meeting to modify the definition that would be proposed by the trauma committee, or is that one that we're prepared to do today?
I'm not prepared to do it today.
I don't
Sally?
know that we have any authority or recommendations to make to the trauma committee because they made a recommendation.
Correct.
Voted on a recommendation to go to GETAC.
Correct. But if it's going to GTAC, we can equally make a recommendation that a definition
Better
be
defined.
modified and better defined.
Okay, yeah.
Yes, I would agree.
So should we do that today, or is that something that requires a little more research?
I mean, if we want to just define it for statistical purposes, I think we can make that pretty clear today. If we need more, for statistical purposes, I think we could make that recommendation today. If we wanted to use it for other purposes, that would take more research and more thought, I think.
Right,
I
I agree with
agree.
that.
Okay. So then, in terms of an exact charge to bring back to GTAC, I then would state this as we would endorse a definition of adult being the 15th birthday, purely for statistical purposes for trauma, but for regulatory as well as clinical recommendations, we will come back with subsequent.
Further study needs to be done.
Okay.
Yep, that sounds good.
All right. Reports on Regional Advisory Council chairs. That was Britt DeVilliers, who's not here with us today.
It's tonight anyway.
Ah, wonderful. Thank you. And disaster planning, Bonnie Hartstein, so we don't have a report for that. So our process, Dr. Science, is that we ask that each of the committee members who are liaisons send a 2 to 3 line description, unless one is presented here today, and then that relieves you of that responsibility. So they can be included in this following agenda. So, moving on to our subsequent agenda items. We have an EMS for Children State Partnership update. I remind you that we had a positive discussion because of external reports, and so I think we have quite a bit to cover. And Anthony Gilchrist is presenting.
Yes, Tony Gilchrist, EMSC. I did put an outline of what I'm going to talk about today because it is quite a bit to cover, but it's just basically what I'm going to say, so we can kind of move through this pretty quickly. We've got a lot of things going on. One of the most pressing issues that I have going on right now is the EMS provider, or the EMS Medical Directors Survey, which I launched at the first of the month. That is a survey going out to all of the medical directors that respond, their agencies respond to 911 calls. There are roughly 324 such medical directors. They're getting notices by email when I have that available to me, and by mail. And to date, I have 58 responses, so we're moving right along. It's going to be open until the 30th of March. The purpose of this survey is to learn. Really, this is kind of, as you know, we've been working on some kind of a process or some kind of to get some kind of an idea about how can we get pediatric online medical direction available 24 hours a day, 7 days a week to everybody in the state. Where we found in our surveys in 2010 that up to 38% of the time when people tried to call medical direction, and this isn't specific to pediatric, but up to 38% of the time, they weren't able to get hold of them when they tried to call. And so we're trying to address those issues. And so to make a long story short, we've come through a lot of discussions with stakeholders, with EMS, with medical directors, with hospitals. We have talked about the idea of having regional pediatric medical direction possibly available at communication centers at the pediatric hospitals. We're just kind of putting a lot of different ideas out there and talking to a lot of folks. And what came of it was, well, we really haven't talked to the medical directors to get their idea and their opinion of whether or not a regional medical direction access is worthy or necessary, or what their utilization is. A lot of the hospitals will really want to know, if we do this, what is this going to mean? And so that's what this survey is all about. And so we're really hoping to get some good responses from that. This is also going to be put together with a much less scientific survey. We did a convenient sample survey at the EMS conference of frontline providers, and it was basically asking more questions about medical direction, both online and offline. And so we're going to put all this information together, and we hope to have this. I'd hope to have this out in May. We're going to be I'm going to be in Maryland in May for our EMSC program, and so we will have these results for you certainly by August. All right, let's just move right along. Another big thing, you'll see that you've got the equipment for ambulances. This is not a new publication. This is the 2009 version, the equipment for ambulances from all the alphabets that are out there. And right now they are looking at revising this document, and public comment is open. And so they have asked lots of the organizations, EMSC, NSIMSO, and of course individuals can also go on there. The website to log on for individuals and put comments in about these recommendations is quite long, so it's on your paperwork. Anybody in the audience want to know what this is, I think you can just simply find it through the facs.org and search the equipment list, and they'll get you there. But we really believe that this is important for a lot of reasons, especially for the EMSC program. Over the last couple years, as you know, we've really worked at coming to what equipment should be on ambulances, and how do we get consensus with that, and how do we work with our stakeholders, and you know, we kind of had some hard knocks early on because I don't think we really engaged the stakeholders enough, and so now we've you know, I think we've really worked hard with the committees, with organizations and family organizations, other folks out there to kind of come together on what equipment should be included, not just in our rules, but there have been several recommendations made so far that this list be a reference material in the rules. And so as such, we really think it's important that this reference material be as reflective of what we think an equipment list should be, and as accurate as it can be, so that people will actually use the reference material. That being said, there are several things that I think that we've learned from our stakeholders. We're not going to be recommending from the EMSC side a lot of changes, but some of them I think that are important. Underneath C, immobilization devices, we really think the lower extremity femur traction devices probably should be at least moved to the optional side of this. And the reason is because many of the pediatric orthopedic surgeons, the surgeons that we've talked to, some of the trauma folks, they've all said the same thing. We don't like these things. We don't want our people to use them. And so I've asked for them to send me some materials so that we can put that together with any recommendation. But I would also like to get, you know, other people's opinion on that. But from the more practical side of it, this is one of those items that many people across the state said, we never use it. It's an expensive piece of equipment, and you know, we don't think it's something that should be required, so we're going to recommend the same thing. Yeah, another thing, very simple thing, I think, is that we've talked about it, and you know, we don't see a reason for a length-based tape on a BLS ambulance as an essential item. We think that should just simply be moved as an ALS item or optional for the BLSs. Certainly, we would want to leave it on ALS. All ALS ambulances should have a length-based tape. Other recommendations that we think are important on the required equipment for advanced life support, where it says airway and ventilation equipment, we really think, especially when it comes to pediatrics, and we really haven't worked out, you know, how we might word this yet, but especially when it comes to pediatrics, that, you know, if you're going to carry intubation equipment, laryngoscopes and tubes and that sort of thing, that it really should not be required, or it shouldn't be considered on here an essential piece of equipment, because I think there's good literature out there, a lot of folks, and some who we've talked to in these committees and with our stakeholders that said, look, we don't want our people intubating children. We just bag them, and we're okay with that. And so I think that's, you know, I think there's good literature out there to support that. So we just want to move that to the optional side of the gig. And so that's really the majority of the recommendations that we're looking at. It's not much, but we do want to get whatever feedback. I will tell you that I got these about a week and a half or 2 weeks ago, and we've got like 2 weeks to put these recommendations in. I think the actual site closes on March 1st, but the other thing that I think is important is that, you know, I represent EMSC, of course, and EMSC has asked the states for recommendations. but also represent the Texas at the Pediatric Emergency Care Council in the CMSO. And you know, I really think that it's important that we're consistent, that all the recommendations that we make are the same from Texas, and that it's really a consensus agreement rather than, you know, one group or another. And I think that would make a stronger statement than anything else, that all the groups said the same thing.
So, Tony, are you asking members of this committee as well as members from the audience to forward their comments to you?
Yeah, they can forward their comments to me. There's also, you know, obviously you can go onto the website as an individual and give your own comments. But as far as, like I said, we will be making a recommendation for NACIMSO, and that's the one that you know, I've got until next week to make those recommendations. But and then we'll be making a recommendation for EMSC. And so I would love to have anybody's input, and keep in mind that, you know, one of the things that they have strongly suggested is that, you know, they'll take your recommendation regardless, but if you don't have supporting documentation for it, it's probably going to go in a pile. Right? And so if you send recommendations, please send any information that you have. And I've asked some folks already for some specific information, but I'd be glad to get any information that you have.
So, Tony, in terms of their process for generating the next document, they would align this with existing PALs, NOWs, et cetera. So things like meconium aspirators may disappear anyway.
Yeah, well, I would think that they would, because that science is out there. However, you know, it's a consensus document. Not everything on here is consistent with everything else. And so, you know, who knows exactly what the end product is going to be. But I would, you know, those things that are in the most current literature, meconium aspirator, you know, that's one of those things I just marked it out, because we are going to recommend that go away.
Okay.
Yes. But it is a consensus document. They are asking for input. Unfortunately, they didn't give us a whole lot of lead time for this, but I'd be more than happy to take anything that you have in terms of recommendations for that. Okay, moving on. We have, I've got listed here the Essential Pediatric Airway Project. We have purchased, again in response to our surveys and some of the talks that we've had with our stakeholders, we've purchased a supply of neonatal bag valve mask and a smaller supply of pediatric end-tidal CO2 detectors. And our idea here is not to, you know, stock up ambulances that already carry this equipment anyway, but to reach out to those folks that have, you know, that right now aren't, for whatever reason, carrying this equipment, and get that equipment to them, and then go from there, because we really feel strongly that this will be clarified in our next you know, rule change. But there's some time going to come up you know, between now and then. It's going to be possibly 2014 before those rules get put out there, and we want to make sure that those most essential pieces of equipment are on every ambulance as far as we can. Now, we probably won't be able to catch every one of them the first go around, but we want to make sure that if ambulances are missing neonatal BVMs, or if they're intubating children and they don't have any way to check an end-tidal, that we can help them to get that equipment. We're going to be working through the regions to distribute this equipment out, and we really want to work with them to come up with some kind of a way to make sure that we get the equipment first to the volunteer and the rural, you know, those small agencies that, you know, really, you know, 10 or 15 bucks is not much for an agency to buy a piece of equipment. But when they're struggling with everything that they have, we really want to make sure that they get that equipment first. And so we'll work with the RACs to do that.
Is there a deadline for where?
There is not a deadline right now. I do have a form that I'm going to be giving out to the RACs this evening. It's very simple, but just so that we can kind of keep track with, how many to send out to the racks and, who needs them. I've even asked on the form why you need it, but I've made it clear that that's an optional, because if we find that there's a pattern there, if people do answer that question, we find that there's a pattern there, that's something we can address. All right. So again, it's not intended to replace the equipment that people are currently supplying themselves, but really to fill the gaps. Education, we are doing a number of things here. We're working with the TCH, the brand new EMS Center of Excellence, and with HFD and with some others, that we are putting together some educational modules, and our intention is to put those modules out on our website so that they are free and available to everyone. It's going to take a little bit of work with our IS people and get all that worked out, but that is in the process. We're also working with Dr. Jenna Miller and at Baylor College of Medicine. She's been doing a respiratory distress and failure module in which she's gathering some data on knowledge retention, training and knowledge retention of the module. And of course, we're budgeted for at least 6 regional CE programs, and I really want to hear from some folks out there in the regions that want to get with us and put on some pediatric education. We want to work with you on getting that done. Protocol reviews. I'm really excited that we're finally in a place with protocol reviews. I can tell you that the reviews are getting done through the Evidence-Based Outcome Center at Texas Children's Hospital. The literature search is completed on the first topics. The analysis are underway, and summary should be presented. As a matter of fact, they told us they think they'll have 2 summaries ready for us by May, and I'm hoping that's the case. And of course, they'll be put out on the website as well. Now, this is a kind of a one-time project in terms of, we are paying the EBOC to do this with supplemental funds, and so our challenge is going to be, what to do when that funding stream runs out and where to go next. And so we'll be working on that between now and the end of the year when they'll be finishing up their agreement with us. And on regionalization systems of care, regionalized systems of care, I reported at the last meeting that there was a grant opportunity and that we were working with Dr. Richard Rainey and some folks at Texas Tech University who were looking into applying for that grant. This grant was really targeting developing a regionalized system of care that took in not only rural and tribal communities, but also crossed borders and specifically across state lines. So there was a lot in that grant that we were interested in, simply from the fact that we are pursuing an agenda of developing regionalized systems of care anyway, and it just fit in line. Subsequently, there was a lot of work done. Dr. Rainey is here today. He and his team did a lot of work, done a lot of footwork on this, and ultimately they figured out given the scope of the grant and the size of their region and a lot of other factors going on there, that it just wasn't financially feasible at this time to do that as a standalone project. Nonetheless, I think that there are a lot of lessons to be learned from what they've done, from the work that they've done, and from we've worked with them very early on to bring together a pretty good group, I think, of stakeholders from the associations and organizations, different groups that are out there that will be instrumental as we move forward with any kind of idea of regionalization. And a lot of times folks are asking, well, what is this regionalization thing? What are you talking about? Are you talking about regionalizing the system somewhat similar to the trauma system, but just for pediatrics? Or are you talking about building a whole new kind of thing? And the fact is that right now what we're doing is looking at the literature, and we're looking at what other states are doing, and we're trying to find out what works other places and what doesn't work, and to put out some information to our stakeholders and get some interest from our stakeholders in developing a regionalized system of care for Texas, and see what develops here. So we've got a lot of work to do, but I think we're really that we've really got a lot of groundwork under us now. That we have, like I said, we've developed a good group of stakeholders. We have got a lot of information, and as a part of that, we have invited Tommy St. Marsh, who's going to be here tomorrow night at our EMSC Advisory Council. She is the EMSC Program Manager in Arizona, and they have recently developed a designation system for their pediatric, for their hospitals, their pediatric designation system for their hospital emergency departments in Arizona. This is one of the newer ones. It appears to be moving along well. It appears to be successful early on, but it is early. What's unique about her program is that they actually brought in the Arizona chapter of the AAP, who is administering the program there. And I've looked at a lot of programs around the state. I've visited some of the places. I've been talking to folks, some of them that have been doing this for years, and some of them that just put it together in the last couple of years. And probably the number one problem they have is how do they keep it running administratively. And so, that's probably the biggest reason I thought, well, I'd like to hear a little bit more from Arizona about how they're doing what they're doing, and go from there. It has been asked from us. In fact, in the chat trauma work group just a few minutes ago, somebody asked, are we trying to get to do what they're doing? No, we're just trying to glean information from them. But we are going to be presenting that information tomorrow evening. We'd like to. It's going to be right next door at 5:30, she's going to be here. Dr. Rainey's going to talk just briefly about that project and what they've learned from the application of the Sprott grant. And then we're just really going to open the floor to discussion about what can regionalization look like. And as big as Texas is, and looking around at all the different states and what they're doing, I really believe that as big as Texas is, we really need to, when we're talking about a regionalization program or any kind of a system of care, we really need to talk about system, region by region, because many of our regions are as big as most of the other states that are doing these programs. And so, and they're so, different in different parts of the states. And so, really a lot to talk about in terms of what can we do. It's really all focused, it's not just focused on having, some regional system where we have a regional children's hospital. It's really focused on how do we get those small rural community hospitals out there the support and the help they need to be prepared for pediatrics, and to fit them into a system of care, largely that due to the great work that we've done in Texas on the trauma system, on a lot of other areas, that we have some systems out there we're just not really tied into very well for kids. And we really have a lot of hospitals out there that really aren't prepared to handle those kids that are brought to their emergency room first. And so that's really what this is aimed at doing, is helping and supporting those hospitals to get to where they need. And just as it happens, the national EMSC program is just fixing to launch a brand new pediatric emergency department preparedness program. You'll probably remember several years ago the emergency department survey that was put out showed something like 6% of the hospitals in the nation, had everything were considered prepared. And really what I think they failed to show was that 83 or 4% of those hospitals, we're looking pretty good. I mean, most of the hospitals had 83 or 4% of the equipment and the materials and the education that they needed. This program is going to re-survey every hospital in the country. We, in the Texas EMSC, have been designated as a lead for 11 states, 10 states in the territory in this project, and it's really going to be more about a quality improvement program. People the emergency departments that get involved in and do the survey will have immediate access to data so that they can benchmark themselves, see where they're at, see what they need to do. And there's going to be a support system that we're building into the system so that what the survey really is a way for you to see where you are. Let us help you decide where you want to be a year from now, 5 years from now, and work us out a plan to get there. And so you'll be able to benchmark by what other hospitals of like size and volume are doing around the country, and also across the board what the hospitals are doing. So I think it's really going to help us tremendously to promote the idea of pediatric preparedness, especially for those community hospitals that really need the most help.
Just a couple of comments about the pediatric preparedness. Members of this group and new members might remember that, or may now learn that we had endorsed the prior document that was the consensus for equipment and services that should be provided in hospital EDs, and that went to the big GETAC committee. So it is something that we have shown support for in the past. So it seems very relevant that we would continue to show that kind of support. One thing that that does strike me with the concept of QI performance measurement and benchmarking, and it's important to the way that we take this project and move forward with it, is that in the world of quality improvement, benchmarking and setting goals at what benchmarks are really typically speaking to a mean or a median, which means you're really trying to achieve mediocrity in a process. The way out of that is clearly looking at our own performance and mapping our own performance within different systems as we move forward in time. What's critical to that is the way that we use output and data from our trauma systems, from our whatever measures that we continue to measure on a local level, so that as we design ways to apply this kind of QI measurement, we really need to be thinking about how we do it locally and how we benchmark against our own performance in the past.
Right. Like I said, we've got several things going on. I will be asking from time to time for some help and support from not only this committee, but each of the committees and the RAC chairs. But like I said, right now, the most pressing is get back with medical directors in their regions and encourage them to get this survey filled out. It's something that they, along with the hospitals, have asked for, and will really help us to move forward with decisions on which way to go from here. And then, like I said, we will be needing a lot of support moving forward across the state to come up with, what is the right regionalized plan for us.
Great.
Okay,
Thank you. Any questions for Tony?
I just have a comment, Charles. Deb and I were talking, and Deb's been here 10 years. I've been here probably 15 years or so, and we remember the days when the EMSC report took about 2.5 seconds because they weren't doing anything.
Yeah, but I'm long-winded.
And that doesn't matter. You're doing something. And we just want to recognize that the EMSC State Partnership Grant, as it exists today, is incredible. And thank you for all the work that you're doing on behalf of kids in the state.
Thank you. For all your support.
Along that same vein, we have Dr. Susan Rodriguez, who is giving us a child fatality review team update.
Thank you. I want to give you some updates about the State Child Fatality Review Team Committee, which I serve, and on their behalf, I want to tell you some things that are going on. First of all, we have a brand new chair. Dr. Juan Parra, who had been the chair for the last 2 years, completed his term, and we have a new chair who's Captain Stephen Telles, who is a DPS captain based out of